The moment my husband realized the woman sitting across from my divorce attorney was his mistress, every bit of color drained from his face. He looked at me, then at her, then back at the stack of printed transcripts spread across the conference table. I don't understand, he stammered. His mistress looked just as confused. Then my lawyer slid a small black device across the table. It looked harmless. A simple smart home voice hub. This, my lawyer said calmly, contains over 200 recordings from the last 23 months. My husband actually laughed. That's impossible. It isn't. You can't record private conversations, my lawyer smiled. The recordings were automatically created whenever your voice activated the home assistant. You and your girlfriend triggered it hundreds of times while discussing your affair inside the marital home. Silence. Complete silence. For nearly 2 years they had joked about how careful they were, how they deleted every text, used disappearing messages, met during business trips. Never left receipts, never got caught. They thought they were smarter than everyone else. They never once realized that every "Hey, assistant" command had captured the next several minutes of conversation before shutting off. Arguments, love confessions, vacation plans, jokes about me. Plans for how they would slowly convince me to agree to selling our house. Even discussions about hiding money before filing for divorce. Every lie, every promise, every betrayal, recorded, time-stamped, backed up. When my husband finally understood what he was hearing, he didn't deny anything. He simply buried his face in his hands. His mistress burst into tears. Neither of them realized that was only half of what I had brought into that room. By the time the divorce was finalized, he hadn't just lost his marriage. He lost our home, most of his savings, his promotion, several close friends, and the woman he threw everything away for. Looking back now, people always ask me the same question. How did you stay so calm? The truth? I wasn't calm, I was devastated. I just learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the evidence. My name is Emily. I'm 34 years old. And until 3 years ago, I genuinely believed I had one of those marriages people secretly envied. My husband, Daniel, and I had been together for 11 years and married for 8. We weren't rich. We weren't the couple posting staged romantic photos every weekend. But we had something I thought mattered more. Trust. Or at least I believed we did. We bought our first house together after years of saving. Every room held memories we'd built side by side. We painted the walls ourselves because we couldn't afford contractors. We assembled furniture while arguing over impossible instruction manuals. We celebrated promotions with takeout pizza on the living room floor because all our money had gone toward the mortgage. It wasn't glamorous. It was ours. Daniel worked as a regional sales manager, which meant frequent travel. At least that's what I believed. I worked remotely as a graphic designer, so I spent far more time at home. Every Sunday evening, I'd help him pack. I'd tuck little handwritten notes into his suitcase, sometimes his favorite snacks, sometimes a photo from one of our vacations. He always smiled when he found them, or at least he pretended to. If someone had told me then that my husband was already living a second life, I would have laughed in their face. Because that's the thing about betrayal. It almost never starts with obvious lies. It starts with tiny changes. Changes you explain away because love teaches you to give the benefit of the doubt. I had no idea those tiny changes were about to destroy everything I thought I knew. And the first crack appeared because of something so small, so ordinary, that I almost ignored it completely. The first crack in my marriage didn't come from lipstick on a collar, a mysterious perfume, or a late-night phone call. It came from a cup of coffee. Daniel had just returned from what he said was a 3-day business trip to Chicago. As always, I woke up early to make him breakfast before he headed back to the office. While I was pouring coffee into his favorite mug, he walked into the kitchen, smiled, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "Thanks, babe." Then he froze. His eyes weren't on me. They were on the mug. For just a split second, I saw panic flash across his face before he forced another smile. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just tired." I didn't think much of it until later that afternoon when I loaded the dishwasher. The mug he'd been staring at wasn't his favorite. It was one we'd bought only a week earlier after the old one had cracked. So why had he looked at it like he'd never seen it before? I laughed at myself for even noticing. People get tired after traveling. That was all, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. Over the next few weeks, little things started piling up. Daniel began locking his phone. Not with the simple 4-digit code he'd used for years. Now it required Face ID. If I picked it up to move it off the couch, he'd casually reach over and take it back. Work emails, he'd say. Confidential stuff. Fair enough. I worked with clients too. Privacy wasn't unusual. But then came the business trips. Before, he'd call me every night. Sometimes we'd stay on video for an hour while he complained about airports and hotel food. Now his calls became rushed. I've got to run. The client's waiting. I'll call tomorrow. Tomorrow rarely came. His messages became shorter too, landed safely, busy day, good night, love you, no photos, no random jokes. No little details about his day. It felt like I was texting a coworker instead of my husband. One Friday evening, he came home carrying a small gift bag. I picked something up for you at the airport. Inside was an expensive bottle of perfume. I smiled. It smells amazing, but something felt off. Daniel had never once bought perfume. He didn't even know what brands I liked. How did you pick this? He shrugged. The saleswoman recommended it. Months later, I discovered that perfume wasn't bought for me. It had been intended for someone else. He'd simply given it to the wrong woman. At the time, though, I had no idea. I thanked him and hugged him. He hugged me back. His embrace felt strangely hesitant, as if he were comforting someone he'd already decided to leave. Still, I ignored the feeling, because that's what love does. It fills in missing pieces with hope. Then came our anniversary. 8 years married, we'd always celebrated with dinner somewhere nice. This year, Daniel claimed he couldn't get out of an important client meeting. I'm so sorry, Em. We'll celebrate this weekend. He looked genuinely guilty. So I believed him. That evening I ordered takeout, watched a movie alone, and tried not to feel disappointed. Around 10 o'clock, I texted him. Hope the meeting went well. Drive safe. Love you. He didn't reply until after midnight. Long night, just leaving now. The next morning, while tossing a receipt into the trash, I noticed another one already inside. Normally, I wouldn't have looked, but one word caught my eye. Rosewood Bistro. It was one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. The receipt was for 2 people, 2 steaks. Wine, dessert, the date, our anniversary. My stomach tightened. When Daniel walked into the kitchen, I held up the receipt. Did you have a client dinner? He glanced at it for barely a second. Oh, yeah. The company paid. Big account. He answered too quickly, almost rehearsed. I wanted to ask more questions. Instead, I nodded. Because accusing someone without proof felt wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. The locked phone, the canceled anniversary, the rushed calls, the strange perfume, the expensive dinner. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they painted a picture I wasn't ready to see. Around 3 in the morning, I got out of bed for a glass of water. As I walked past Daniel's office, I noticed a faint light under the door. He was inside, whispering. The moment the floor creaked beneath my feet, the whispering stopped. A chair scraped across the hardwood floor. The door opened almost immediately. He smiled. Couldn't sleep. I forced a smile back. No, what about you? He lifted his phone. Just answering a few work emails. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I wanted to believe him. I really did. But for the first time in 11 years together. A tiny voice in the back of my mind whispered something I never thought I'd think about my own husband. What if he's lying? After that night, something inside me changed. Not all at once. It wasn't like a switch flipped and suddenly I knew my husband was cheating. It was quieter than that. I stopped looking for reasons to trust him. And I started noticing the things I had been desperately trying to ignore. For the first time in our marriage, I paid attention instead of making excuses. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed completely relaxed. If anything, he acted sweeter. He brought me flowers for no reason, asked if I wanted to go out for dinner, started saying, I love you more often. A year earlier, those gestures would have melted my heart. Now they felt rehearsed, like someone trying to cover a stain instead of cleaning it. One Tuesday morning, he announced another business trip. 3 days this time, he said while zipping up his suitcase. Big presentation. I smiled. Good luck. He kissed my forehead and walked out the door. I stood at the window watching his car disappear around the corner. Then I did something I never imagined I'd do. I called his office. Hi, I said as casually as I could. Is Daniel already in the airport? There was a brief pause. I'm sorry, Daniel isn't traveling this week. I felt my grip tighten on the phone. What do you mean? We don't have any client trips scheduled. The receptionist sounded confused. I think he'll be in the office tomorrow. I thanked her and hung up. For nearly 5 minutes, I just sat on the edge of the couch. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It had gone strangely numb. He hadn't just lied. He had created an entire fake business trip. That evening, I drove past the hotel he'd claimed he was staying at. His car wasn't there. I didn't know where he was, but I knew exactly where he wasn't. That was the moment I stopped hoping this was all a misunderstanding. The next morning, I started gathering information. Not because I wanted revenge, because I needed the truth. I quietly photographed our financial statements, downloaded copies of our joint account transactions, made backups of mortgage documents, insurance policies, retirement accounts, anything that might matter later. If I was wrong, no harm done. If I was right, I'd be prepared. A few days later, Daniel came home carrying his suitcase like nothing had happened. He hugged me. "I missed you." I hugged him back. "So, how was the presentation?" He smiled without hesitation. "It went great." "What hotel did you stay at again?" He answered instantly. "The Lakeshore Grand." Another lie. That hotel had no reservation under his name. I'd already checked. It wasn't the lie itself that hurt anymore. It was how effortlessly it came to him, like breathing, like he'd been practicing for a long time. That night after he fell asleep, I walked quietly through the house, not searching for another phone, not reading his messages. I already knew he wouldn't leave obvious evidence. Instead, I noticed something sitting on the kitchen counter. Our smart home assistant. The little voice-controlled speaker we'd bought years earlier because it was on sale. We mostly used it for timers, weather updates, and turning lights on and off. As I stared at it, I remembered something I'd read months ago while changing its settings. Voice history, activity logs, recordings. Curious, I opened the companion app on my tablet. Most of the recordings were exactly what you'd expect. Set a timer for pasta. Play jazz. Turn off the living room lights. I smiled despite myself. Then I noticed something odd. There were hundreds of voice activations during times I wasn't home. Many happened while Daniel was supposedly working late. Others happened during weekends when I'd been visiting my parents. I tapped one at random. The recording began. "Assistant, what's the weather Saturday?" Then came a few seconds of silence. The recording should have ended instead. Two voices kept talking, a woman's laugh, soft, comfortable, familiar with my husband in a way that made my stomach drop. Daniel laughed too. Then I heard him say words that shattered whatever hope I still had. "She thinks I'm in meetings all weekend." The woman giggled. "So, we're safe, completely?" "I told Emily I had another client dinner." My entire body went cold. I replayed it, again and again, praying I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. There was another recording, and another. Some lasted only a few seconds. Others captured entire conversations after accidental voice activations. Enough to reveal jokes, plans, affection, secrets. By midnight, I wasn't crying anymore. I was listening, taking notes, saving every single recording in multiple places. Because I finally understood something. My husband hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been bringing her into our home, into the kitchen where we'd planned our future, onto the couch where we'd watched movies together, into the life I had spent 11 years building. And neither of them had the slightest idea that the walls of our home had quietly remembered everything. The first recording could have been dismissed as a misunderstanding. The second removed all doubt. By the 10th, I stopped hoping I was taking things out of context. By the 50th, I realized I didn't actually know the man I'd been married to for 8 years. I spent the next several nights wearing headphones after Daniel fell asleep. Every recording was time-stamped. Every conversation fit together like pieces of a puzzle I had never wanted to solve. Sometimes they were only 30 seconds long. Other times, the smart assistant stayed awake for several minutes after hearing its wake word, capturing conversations they assumed no one would ever hear. That's how I learned her name. Lauren. She wasn't some stranger from another city. She worked for the same company as Daniel. The business trips were weekends away with her. The late client dinners were date nights. The overtime wasn't overtime at all. It was an affair that had been going on for nearly 2 years. What hurt the most wasn't hearing them say they loved each other. It was hearing them laugh at me. One recording started with Lauren asking the assistant to play music. The song began, but before it could finish loading, Daniel laughed. "So, did Emily believe the conference story?" Lauren chuckled. "Does she ever question anything?" Daniel actually laughed harder. "No, she's too trusting." Too trusting, 3 words. That was how my husband described the woman who had stood beside him through layoffs, family emergencies, and every difficult year of our marriage. I had trusted him because I loved him. To him, that made me easy to deceive. I paused the recording and finally cried. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears rolling down my face while the rest of the house slept. I wasn't mourning the marriage anymore. I was mourning the person I thought I had married. The next morning, I looked at Daniel across the breakfast table. He smiled. "Everything okay?" I smiled back. "Just didn't sleep well." "I've got another trip next week," he said casually while buttering his toast. "Only 2 nights," I nodded. Drive safely. Inside, I almost laughed. He was making new lies while I already knew the old ones. Over the next 2 weeks, I became the best actress of my life. I kissed him goodbye every morning, asked about his day every evening, folded his laundry, cooked dinner. Nothing changed on the surface. Behind the scenes, everything had changed. I hired one of the best divorce attorneys in the city. At our first meeting, I placed a flash drive on her desk. "I think my husband is cheating." She plugged it into her laptop. An hour later, she slowly closed the computer. "Emily, I'm so sorry." Those 4 words were all I needed to hear. She helped me create a plan, not a revenge plan, a protection plan. First, I quietly opened a separate bank account in my name, perfectly legal. My salary began going there instead of into our joint checking account. I made copies of every financial document we owned. Then I learned something even worse. Daniel had been slowly moving money into another account. Small amounts. $500 here, $800 there, never enough to attract attention. Over nearly 2 years, it totaled almost $40,000, money that belonged to both of us. Money he had apparently been saving for a future that didn't include me. My lawyer simply smiled. "Keep documenting. The more evidence we have, the better." So I did. I never confronted him, not once. Instead, I quietly collected everything. Bank transfers, credit card statements, hotel bookings, restaurant receipts, voice recordings, photographs, even social media screenshots where Lauren accidentally appeared in the background of company events Daniel claimed he hadn't attended. Then fate handed me something I never expected. One Friday afternoon, Daniel forgot his laptop at home. He called me 20 minutes after leaving. "Can you bring it to the office?" "Of course." When I arrived, the receptionist smiled. "Oh, he's in conference room B." I walked down the hallway carrying his laptop. The conference room was empty. Confused, I turned the corner toward his office. That's when I heard laughter, Daniel's laughter, and a woman's. The office door wasn't completely closed. Through the narrow gap, I saw them. Lauren was sitting on the edge of his desk. He was standing between her knees. They kissed. Slowly, comfortably, like 2 people who had done it 1,000 times before. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't burst through the door. I simply raised my phone, took 3 photos, turned around, and walked away. Neither of them ever knew I had been there. As I sat in my car afterward, I looked at the pictures for only a second before forwarding them directly to my lawyer. Then I deleted them from my phone, not because I wanted to erase what I'd seen, because I didn't need to look at them again. I already had everything I needed. Now all that remained was choosing the perfect day to let Daniel discover that while he thought he had been living a perfect double life, I had quietly been building the case that would destroy it. For 3 weeks after I saw Daniel kiss Lauren in his office, I didn't say a single word about the affair. I smiled. I laughed at his jokes. I asked him how work was going. Every lie he told simply became another piece of evidence. Looking back, I think that's what unsettled him the most. He expected me to eventually become suspicious, to ask questions, to argue. Instead, I became calmer than I'd been in months. He had no idea that I'd already stopped seeing him as my husband. He was simply the man I was preparing to divorce. One evening, he walked into the kitchen wearing the smile I'd once fallen in love with. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe we should sell the house." I kept chopping vegetables. "Oh, yeah, it's getting expensive to maintain. We could downsize, pay off some debt, maybe even start fresh." Start fresh. The exact phrase I'd heard him use in one of the recordings with Lauren. "Once the house is sold, we'll finally have enough money to start fresh together." I looked up and forced a thoughtful smile. "Maybe you're right." His shoulders visibly relaxed. For the first time in weeks, I watched genuine excitement cross his face. He thought I was making his plan easier. In reality, I was making sure he believed he was still in control. The next morning, I met my lawyer. We finalized every document, the divorce petition, the financial records, the evidence index, the recordings, the photographs, the proof that he'd hidden marital assets, the timeline of the affair. Everything was organized into neat folders. When she looked up from the stack, she smiled. "He's going to have a very difficult time explaining all of this." A week later, Daniel left for another business trip. The moment his car disappeared, movers arrived. Not to empty the house. Only my belongings, my clothes, my grandmother's jewelry, my personal documents, my computer, the artwork I'd purchased before we were married, everything legally mine. By sunset, the house looked almost untouched. Except my life had quietly disappeared from it. I spent that night in a small, furnished apartment I'd rented months earlier. Daniel texted me around 9. "Miss you already." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied. Sleep well, it was the last affectionate message he would ever receive from me. Monday morning arrived. Daniel returned home expecting breakfast, coffee, and me. Instead, he found an empty closet, bare bathroom shelves, a wedding ring sitting neatly on the kitchen counter, and an envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Daniel, by the time you read this, I've already moved out. You don't need to invent another business trip. You don't need another excuse. You don't need another lie. I know about Lauren. You'll be hearing from my attorney. Emily. According to one of our mutual friends, Daniel called my phone 23 times that day. Then he started texting, "Please let me explain. It's not what you think. We need to talk. Please answer." Then came the voicemail. He was crying, actually crying. "I made a mistake. Please don't do this." A mistake, 2 years. Hundreds of lies, dozens of fake business trips. Thousands of dollars secretly moved out of our joint account. He called it a mistake. I never replied. Instead, my lawyer did. 3 days later, Daniel arrived at her office believing we'd finally have a private conversation. He looked exhausted. His beard had grown in. His eyes were bloodshot. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then Lauren walked into the conference room. She looked confused. "So, why am I here?" Daniel frowned. "What are you talking about?" My lawyer calmly placed 3 folders on the table, one in front of me, one in front of Daniel, one in front of Lauren. Daniel looked at me. "What is this?" My lawyer answered before I could. "Evidence," he laughed nervously. "What evidence?" Without saying a word, she pressed the play button on a small speaker. Lauren's voice filled the room. "She still thinks you're working late?" Then Daniel's laughter. "Emily never questions anything." His face lost every bit of color. The second recording played, then the third, then another, every excuse, every lie, every cruel joke. Every promise they'd made to each other inside my home. Lauren slowly turned toward him. "You told me those recordings didn't exist," Daniel whispered. I didn't know." My lawyer slid another folder toward him. "Those are the financial records showing the money you transferred out of the marital accounts." Another folder. "The photographs from your office." Another. "The timeline of your affair." Daniel didn't speak again. He simply stared at the table, realizing that the life he'd carefully built on deception had collapsed in less than 15 minutes. And the worst part for him, the divorce hearing was still weeks away. The consequences were only just beginning. 3 weeks after the meeting at my lawyer's office, we stood in family court for the final hearing. Daniel looked nothing like the confident man I'd married. His expensive suits had been replaced by one that looked hastily pressed. He had lost weight. The dark circles under his eyes made it obvious he hadn't been sleeping. For a brief second, our eyes met. He looked away first. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I just felt finished. By that point, there was nothing left to fight over emotionally. The recordings, financial records, photographs, and bank transfers had done all the talking. Neither Daniel nor his attorney could argue against evidence that came directly from his own words and actions. The hidden account he'd slowly built over 2 years was traced. The transfers were documented. The affair itself wasn't what mattered most in court. It was the deception surrounding our finances and the misuse of marital assets. Those choices came back to haunt him. When everything was finalized, I kept the house. The equity we'd spent years building stayed with me. Daniel was ordered to account for the money he had secretly transferred and to compensate me for my share. As we walked out of the courthouse, he finally spoke. "Emily," I stopped but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry. I know saying it doesn't change anything. I ruined everything." For a long moment, I said nothing. Then I looked back at the man I had once imagined growing old with. "You didn't ruin one day. You ruined hundreds of ordinary days where I trusted you. That's what I can never get back." His eyes filled with tears. Mine didn't. I had already cried enough for both of us. I walked to my car without looking back. That was the last conversation we ever had. Life has a strange way of delivering consequences without anyone planning revenge. About 2 months after the divorce, one of our mutual friends called me. "I thought you should know. Daniel and Lauren broke up." I wasn't surprised. Apparently, once the affair became public at work, everything changed. The excitement of secret hotel rooms and stolen weekends disappeared. Now they had bills, stress, gossip, people whispering whenever they walked into meetings. The fantasy couldn't survive real life. Lauren eventually admitted she'd believed Daniel when he said our marriage had been basically over. Then she learned about the recordings. She learned he'd lied to her too. If someone could deceive his wife for 2 years, why would she believe he wouldn't deceive her? Within a few months, she'd transferred to another branch. Their relationship ended quietly. No dramatic screaming, no grand farewell. Just two dishonest people discovering they couldn't trust each other. Daniel's career also took a hit. He wasn't fired, but he was passed over for the management promotion he'd been chasing for years. His supervisor reportedly told him the company expected better judgment from someone in a leadership role. Reputations take years to build, only moments to destroy. As for me, the first few months were harder than I'd expected. The silence inside the house felt overwhelming. Every room reminded me of plans that would never happen. For a while, I considered selling it. Instead, I decided to reclaim it. I painted the bedroom a color Daniel always hated. I turned his old office into an art studio. I adopted a rescue golden retriever who immediately decided the entire couch belonged to him. Slowly, the house stopped feeling like the place where my marriage ended. It became the place where my new life began. I traveled, spent more time with my parents, reconnected with friends I'd unintentionally neglected over the years, started saying yes to opportunities I'd always postponed. For the first time in a long time, my happiness didn't depend on someone else's honesty. It's been a little over a year now. People still ask whether I hate Daniel. The answer surprises them. I don't. Hate requires energy. Energy I'd rather spend on my own future. If anything, I feel grateful. Not for the affair, not for the lies, but because discovering the truth saved me from spending the rest of my life with someone who never truly valued me. Sometimes losing the person you thought you needed is the only way to make room for the life you actually deserve. So if you're reading this because your instincts keep telling you something isn't right, don't ignore them. Trust isn't blind. Real trust survives honesty. If someone needs hundreds of lies to keep you, they're not protecting your heart. They're protecting themselves. And one final thing, Daniel thought deleting messages would erase his affair. He never imagined the truth had been patiently waiting inside the walls of our own home. Sometimes karma doesn't knock on the door. Sometimes it answers when someone says, "Hey, assistant. Update, I never expected to be back here. But something happened 6 months after the divorce. Hi, everyone. I honestly didn't think I'd ever update this post again. After my divorce was finalized, I blocked Daniel on everything, changed my number, and focused on rebuilding my life. I adopted my golden retriever, renovated the house, started traveling again, and for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. Thousands of you told me to move forward and never look back. That's exactly what I intended to do. Until 6 months ago. It was a Saturday morning, and I was planting flowers in the front yard when a black SUV pulled into my driveway. I assumed it was a delivery driver. Instead, Daniel's parents stepped out. I hadn't seen them since the divorce hearing. His mother looked exhausted. His father suddenly seemed 10 years older. I almost went back inside, but before I could, his mother quietly said, "Emily, please, we just need 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I invited them onto the porch. Neither of them touched the coffee I offered. Finally, his father sighed. "Daniel lost his job." I didn't respond. His mother continued. "Lauren left him months ago." Again, I said nothing. Then came the sentence I never expected to hear. "He wants to buy your forgiveness." I actually thought I'd misheard her. "I'm sorry." "What?" His mother opened her purse and slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a cashier's check for $150,000. I stared at it in complete disbelief. "He says if you accept this, maybe you'll speak to him." I looked at both of them, then back at the check. For a moment, the entire porch was silent. Finally, I asked the only question that mattered. "Does he think this is compensation? Or a down payment?" Neither of them answered. His father lowered his head. His mother started crying. That's when I realized something. They weren't here because they believed the money would fix anything. They were here because they had run out of ideas. Apparently, Daniel had become obsessed with making things right. He'd sold his sports car, liquidated investments, moved into a tiny apartment, taken consulting jobs on weekends, not because a court ordered him to, because he believed that if he could somehow repay the damage financially, maybe I'd forgive him, maybe we'd start over. I pushed the envelope back across the table. "I'm not for sale." His mother's tears came faster. "I know, I just promised him I'd ask." I nodded. "And now you have." They stayed another 10 minutes. We talked about ordinary things, their health, the weather, my dog who insisted on dropping a tennis ball in everyone's lap. As they were leaving, Daniel's father paused beside his car. "You know, I used to think people cheated because they stopped loving someone." He looked toward my house. "I've realized that's not true. Sometimes they cheat because they stop respecting what they already have." Then they drove away. I never saw the check again. About a month later, I received one final email from Daniel, not begging, not making excuses, just apologizing, really apologizing. He admitted that listening to those recordings during the divorce had been the first time he'd truly heard himself. He said hearing his own voice mocking me made him sick. He wrote that he understood why forgiveness wasn't something he deserved. At the end of the email, there was one sentence that stayed with me. The worst punishment wasn't losing my marriage. It was realizing I became someone I would have hated if I'd met him 10 years ago. I never replied. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing left to say. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Some end with accountability, and honestly, I think that's enough. So this will probably be my last update. Thank you to everyone who reminded me that walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you'll ever do. And every now and then, the life waiting on the other side of betrayal turns out to be better than the one you were fighting so hard to save.